Before we descend into the shadows of Providence Creek, if you enjoy these journeys into the unknown, please consider subscribing to the channel. It helps us find new stories to unearth and ensures you won't miss a single chilling tale. Elias Thorne fancied himself a modern man, a man of chemicals and lenses in an age still clinging to spirits and spooks. His arrival in Providence Creek, Maine felt like a regression, a journey backward not just in miles, but in time. He'd guided his horse and buggy, laden with the heavy precious cargo of his trade, off the main railway line and onto a mud-rutted track that seemed determined to swallow his wheels. The journey took 2 days from Portland, 2 days of oppressive silence broken only by the snap of twigs under the horse's hooves and the dense, unsettling hush of the pines. The year was 1908. Men were building flying machines, harnessing electricity and glowing glass bulbs, and speaking of a future free from the shackles of the past. Elias, with his heavy Graflex camera, his polished mahogany tripod, and his sealed boxes of silver-coated glass plates, was an agent of that future. He captured moments. He trapped light. He dealt in empirical proof. Providence Creek, however, dealt in something else entirely. The town was a wound in the forest, a handful of unpainted wooden structures huddled around a stark white chapel whose steeple seemed to puncture the gray October sky. The air smelled of wet wood, sulfur from the nearby bogs, and an underlying scent of river mud that was thick and vaguely sour. The few people he saw on the single muddy street, women in drab, ankle-length dresses and men in worn flannel, did not wave. They stopped their labors, their faces blank and pale, and simply watched him pass. Their eyes were the color of the overcast sky. His destination was the parsonage, a severe 2-story house adjoining the chapel. He was met at the door not by a servant, but by the man himself, Reverend Silas Blackwood. Blackwood was a man carved from hardwood. He was tall, gaunt, with a face that seemed to possess no soft angles. His eyes were sunk deep beneath a heavy brow, and they burned with a cold, piercing intensity. He wore the severe black of his calling, unadorned, yet he commanded the room with an authority Elias had rarely encountered. "Mr. Thorne," Blackwood's voice was a low rumble, like stones grinding together. "You have arrived. We were expecting you." "Reverend Blackwood." "A pleasure," Elias said, offering a hand, which the Reverend ignored. Elias awkwardly retracted it. The journey was bracing. The wilderness tests the mettle of a man. It strips away the unnecessary, Blackwood said, gesturing for Elias to enter. The parlor was dark, the heavy curtains drawn tight against the meager daylight. The only light came from a single oil lamp on a table piled high with heavy, leather-bound books. "You have brought your apparatus?" "I have. My complete portable studio," Elias said, trying to inject some professional enthusiasm into the oppressive atmosphere. "The finest equipment. I assure you, Reverend, the images will be as clear as looking through a window." "Clarity. Yes." Blackwood nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on Elias. "That is precisely what we require. We are a simple people, Mr. Thorne. We do not truck with the vanities of painted portraits or the fripperies of city life. We seek only to document a holy covenant." "The baptism, of course," Elias said. He had been commissioned via a series of terse letters, accompanied by a bank draft for an amount that had shocked him. It was enough to fund his studio for a year. "The Great Baptism," your letter called it. "It is our most sacred day," Blackwood said, his voice dropping. "Once every 7 years, we bring the new generation to the serpent's coil. We wash them in the water, and they are renewed. They are made one with our congregation. It is a profound moment of spiritual union." "And you wish for me to capture it," Elias confirmed. "A group portrait of the congregation and photographs of the ritual itself." "I want the moment," Blackwood stressed, stepping closer. The man smelled of the river, of that same sour mud. "I want the blessing made manifest. I want a record, proof, as you men of science call it, for our descendants, to show them the gravity and the glory of their heritage." "I understand completely," Elias said, though a cold knot was tightening in his stomach. The man's fervor was unsettling. It was the fervor of a zealot, not the quiet faith of a parish priest. "I will need to see the location, the riverbank, to gauge the light." "Tomorrow. The baptism is at dawn, 3 days hence," Blackwood said. You will stay at the Gideon's boarding house. It is the only one. Martha Gideon will see to your needs. You are dismissed, Mr. Thorne." Elias, feeling like a schoolboy scolded by a headmaster, nodded and backed out of the dark parlor, eager for the cold, damp air outside. As he turned to leave the porch, he saw one of the townswomen standing across the street, motionless, staring at him. She was holding a bundle of sticks. When their eyes met, she didn't look away. She simply remained, a statue of homespun wool, her face a pale oval in the gloom. That night, in his small, cold room at the boarding house, Elias unpacked his gear. The landlady, Martha Gideon, was a bird-like woman with terrified eyes who had left a meager supper of cold beans and bread outside his door, knocking once before scurrying away. He cleaned his lenses, checked his flash powder mechanism, and arranged his glass plates. He was a professional. This was just another job. But as he tried to sleep, listening to the alien sounds of the village, the distant cry of a waterfowl, the endless sighing of the pines, and underneath it all, a faint, wet, slurping sound he couldn't identify, he couldn't shake the image of Reverend Blackwood's burning eyes, or the dead, watchful stares of the congregation. He dreamed of being underwater, in thick, dark mud, trying to open his camera, only to find its lens was a closed, milky white eye. The next morning, Elias rose before dawn. The fog was so thick it was like walking through wet cotton. He'd been told the Serpent's Coil River was a mile north of the town, and he set off, his tripod and camera case slung over his shoulder. The path was barely a suggestion, winding deep into the ancient, gnarled woods. The trees here were different, thicker, darker, with bark that looked like scarred flesh and branches that knit together so tightly overhead that they blocked what little light the morning offered. He found the river suddenly. The trees simply stopped, opening onto a wide black ribbon of water that moved with a slow, oily sluggishness. The Serpent's Coil was aptly named. It curved sharply here, forming a natural amphitheater of steep, muddy banks. The air was heavy with the smell of decay and damp earth. The water itself was unsettling. It was not the clear, rushing water of a mountain stream. It was dark, almost opaque, and patches of sickly yellow foam collected in the eddies near the bank. It is as it has always been. Elias spun around, his heart leaping into his throat. Reverend Blackwood was standing not 10 feet away, having approached without a sound. He was joined by 2 other men, broad-shouldered and grim, who stood behind him like silent sentinels. "Reverend, you startled me," Elias said, catching his breath. "This is a quiet place," Blackwood said, his eyes on the water. "This is the heart of Providence Creek. Our town is named for the providence of finding this water. Our ancestors were lost, starving in the wilderness. They drank from this river, and they were changed. They were given purpose." Elias looked at the black, churning water. "They drank this? The water provides," Blackwood said simply. "It is where we were born, and where we are reborn. This bank," he gestured to the flat, muddy clearing, "is our church. This," he pointed to the dark water, "is our font." Elias busied himself with his equipment, eager to turn the conversation to the practical. "The light will be a challenge, Reverend. With the trees so thick in the dawn fog, it's very dim. For a clear shot of the congregation, I'll need them to hold perfectly still. And for the baptism itself, the action, I'll need to use a flash." At this, Blackwood's 2 companions tensed. One of them, a man with a thick beard and colorless eyes, spoke for the first time. "No fire." The Reverend said no fire. "It's not fire precisely," Elias explained patiently. "It's magnesium powder. It produces a very bright, instantaneous flash of light, like lightning. It's the only way to capture a moving subject in this gloom. Without it, the figures will be blurred, like ghosts." Blackwood was silent for a long moment. He seemed to be listening to the river. "Ghosts? No. We do not want ghosts. We want the truth. If you must use your false lightning, so be it. But you will be discreet. You will not disrupt the holy moment. I will be as a fly on the wall, Reverend," Elias promised. He spent an hour there, testing angles, planting his tripod in the thick mud to find a stable position. He would stand here, slightly elevated on a small rise, looking down at the bank where the congregation would gather and the spot where the immersions would take place. The entire time, Blackwood and his men stood motionless, watching him. Not watching his work, Elias realized, just watching him. As he packed his equipment to leave, his foot slipped on a slick rock near the water's edge. He dropped his lens cloth. When he bent to retrieve it, his fingers brushed the water. It was shockingly cold. Not the crisp cold of a mountain stream, but a thick, penetrating cold that felt heavy. And as he pulled his hand back, he saw a strand of dark, hair-like algae clinging to his fingers. He wiped it off on his trousers, repulsed. The substance was strangely resilient, leaving an oily, dark smear on the wool. "Be cautious, Mr. Thorne," Blackwood's voice came from the path above. "The serpent's coil is deep. It does not easily give back what it takes." Elias hurried after them, scrubbing his hand on his handkerchief. The cold sensation lingered on his skin, a dampness that soap and water, back in his room, could not seem to wash away. He found himself staring at his fingers for a long time, convinced he could still see the dark stain, long after it was visibly gone. The morning of the baptism arrived with a palpable weight. The fog was heavier, the air colder, the silence of the town more complete. Elias was at the riverbank before the first hint of gray light. He set up his large camera on its tripod, anchored deep in the mud. He prepared his flash apparatus, a T-bar holding a trough of magnesium powder and an ignition switch. He slid his first glass plate holder into the back of the camera, his fingers numb and clumsy in the damp. Then he heard them. Not footsteps, but a low, rhythmic sound. A chant. From the woods, the congregation emerged. They moved as one body, a dark mass of over 100 people, filing silently down the path and arranging themselves on the muddy bank. They formed a perfect semicircle around the water's edge. Their faces were pale and ecstatic, their eyes wide and fixed on the river. They were all dressed in simple off-white robes. Reverend Blackwood stood at the center, his black attire a stark void in the sea of white. He waded into the serpent's coil until the black water was at his waist. He raised his arms and the chanting stopped. "Behold!" Blackwood's voice boomed, shattering the silence. It echoed strangely off the water, sounding doubled, as if another voice were speaking just beneath his. "The water that gave us life, the water that sustains us, the water that calls us home. We come today to offer our children, to unite them with the true word that sleeps below. We bring them to the font of eternity." The first to be baptized was a young woman Elias recognized from the village. Her name, he'd learned from Martha Gideon in a rare moment of hushed conversation, was Elspeth. She was perhaps 17, with lank, dark hair and the same pale, hollow-eyed look as the others. She trembled, but her face was set in a mask of rapturous determination. She waded out to Blackwood. He grasped her, his large hands on her head and back. "Elspeth, child of Providence," he intoned, "do you forsake the fleeting world of light and air and embrace the eternal covenant of the deep?" "I embrace it," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Then be reborn." Blackwood thrust her backward, submerging her completely in the oily black water. She vanished without a splash, as if the river were made of thick syrup. Elias, his heart hammering against his ribs, focused his lens. This was the moment. Blackwood began to pull her up. Elias readied the flash. Now. Just as Elspeth's face broke the surface, her eyes wide open and her mouth forming a silent O, Elias triggered the flash. Whoosh! A brilliant, blinding white light exploded across the scene, illuminating the riverbank with the starkness of a lightning strike. In that instantaneous flash, Elias saw everything. He saw the congregation, their faces turned upward, their mouths open, their eyes reflecting the white light. He saw Blackwood, his face a mask of savage triumph. And he saw Elspeth. Her face. It was not the face of a girl emerging from water. It was contorted, her skin seeming to ripple. And the water streaming from her was not clear. It was black, thick, and it clung to her, not like droplets, but like grasping, shadowy tendrils. Then, darkness rushed back in, leaving bright purple spots dancing in Elias's vision. The congregation gasped as one, a collective, sibilant hiss. They were blinded, startled by the magnesium flare. "Sacrilege!" one of the bearded men roared. "Peace!" commanded Blackwood. He still held Elspeth, who was now limp in his arms, her head lolling. "The man is but a tool. He does his work." Elias, his hands shaking so badly he could barely function, quickly swapped the exposed plate for a fresh one. He tried to tell himself what he saw was an artifact of the flash, a trick of the intense, unnatural light. It had to be. He photographed the next baptism, and the next. 10 in all. Young men and women, each one wading out, being submerged, and emerging limp, pale, and changed. Each time Elias used his flash, and each time he saw that same horrifying illusion. The water clinging like living tar, the faces momentarily distorted, the congregation watching with a hungry, unified ecstasy. He also took the group portrait Blackwood demanded. He had the entire congregation stand together, the newly baptized in the front, their wet robes clinging to them, their eyes disturbingly blank. They stood perfectly still, an army of pale, damp figures staring into his lens. He took 2 plates, just to be sure. When the ritual was over, the congregation turned and filed back into the woods, carrying the baptized, who seemed unable to walk. They left Elias alone on the riverbank. He packed his equipment with frantic haste. He wanted to run. He wanted to hitch his horse and ride until the smell of pine and river mud was a distant memory. But he was a professional, and he was bound by the contract. More than that, a dreadful, sickening curiosity gripped him. He had to see the plates. He had to know what his camera, his unerlicing machine of truth, had really captured. Before we continue, if this story is pulling you into its depths, please show your support by hitting that subscribe button. It truly helps the channel grow, and it means I can keep bringing you more macabre histories from the dark corners of the world. Back in his room at the boarding house, Elias felt like a man under siege. He barred the door, stuffed cloth into the keyhole, and hung his heaviest blankets over the single window, plunging the room into absolute darkness. This was his sanctuary, his laboratory. Here, in the acrid smell of chemicals, he was the master. He worked by the dim, ruby-red glow of his darkroom lantern. The light was just enough to see the outlines of his trays, but safe enough not to expose the delicate plates. His hands, which had trembled by the river, were steady now. This was his ritual. He unsealed the plate holder containing the first shot, the shot of Elspeth. He slid the heavy glass negative into the developer tray, rocking it gently back and forth. The chemical smell was sharp, stinging his nostrils. He watched, his breath held. Slowly, like a ghost materializing, the image began to appear. First, the highlights, the bright points of the magnesium flash reflecting on the water, the white of the robes. Then, the mid-tones, the pale faces, the dark trees, the form of Blackwood. Finally, the deep shadows. After several minutes, he lifted the plate, letting the developer drip off, and plunged it into the stop bath, then into the fixer. The image stabilized, becoming sharp and permanent. He held the glass plate up to the red lantern. It was perfect. Technically, it was a masterpiece. The focus was razor sharp. The instantaneous flash had frozen the motion completely. He could see every face in the crowd, every detail of the riverbank. And he could see Elspeth, her face breaking the surface, her eyes wide open, her mouth agape, the water streaming from her hair and robes. He took the plate to his small table, where he'd set up his printing station. He had to see the positive image. He placed the negative in the contact printing frame, laid a sheet of silver gelatin paper beneath it, and ignited a small, controlled pinch of flash powder. A brief pop and flash, and the image was transferred. He rushed the paper through the same chemical baths. The positive image swam into view in the developer tray. It was clearer now. The black water was white, the white robes were dark. He stared at the print, his heart a cold stone in his chest. It was all there, just as he'd seen it. The photo was a tableau of nightmares. The crowd, illuminated by the flash, were not looking at Elspeth. They were all looking up, just past her, at the source of the flash, at him. And their faces, oh, their faces. They were not ecstatic. They were predatory. Their mouths were open too wide, their eyes gleaming with a uniform, hungry light. Then he looked at Elspeth. His memory had not been a trick. The water was not behaving like water. It clung to her, yes, but the print revealed why. It was formed into distinct, rope-like tendrils. Several of them were snaked around her arms, her neck. It was entering her open mouth. The water was black in the print, a living, shadowy substance. Elias felt the bile rise in his throat. He stumbled back, knocking over a bottle of fixer, which splashed across the floorboards. He had to see more. He had to be sure. He grabbed the second print, the group portrait of the entire congregation. He had developed it while waiting for the first. It was just as sharp. Over 100 people standing on the bank. The newly baptized, sitting or kneeling in the front row, wrapped in blankets, their eyes vacant. He snatched up his loupe, the powerful magnifying glass he used to check the focus and fine details of his negatives. He brought the print closer to his lantern. He placed the loupe over the faces in the back row, the townspeople half hidden in the shadows of the pines. He zoomed in. He almost screamed. Their faces weren't faces. Not really. In the moment he'd taken the shot, they must have shifted. They were blurred, not by motion, but as if the flesh itself had been fluid. They were smudged, eroded, their features running together like wet paint. They were monstrous. No, not all of them. He scanned the print frantically. The children were clear. The newly baptized were clear, horrifyingly clear in their vacancy. And Reverend Blackwood. Blackwood stood in the very center of the photograph. He was in perfect, pristine focus. Unlike the others, he was not looking at the camera. He was looking slightly to the side at Elspeth, who sat at his feet. And on his face, captured with scientific precision, was an expression of the most profound, sickening satisfaction. Elias threw the print down as if it had burned him. This was impossible. Photographic artifact, chemical smudge, double exposure. He ran through a dozen rational explanations. None of them fit. The camera did not lie. The lens captured only light. Unless the light in Providence Creek was a liar too. He was trapped. He had the evidence in his hands, proof of, he didn't know what. A mass hysteria, a shared monstrous secret. He knew one thing. He could not deliver these photographs to Blackwood. He could not let the Reverend know what he had seen. He spent the rest of the day locked in his room, the chemical stench warring with the sour river smell from outside. He printed the other photos, the ones of the other baptisms. They were all the same. Each one showed the black, tendril-like water claiming its victim. He had to get a better look. He had to understand what he was seeing. He waited for the sun to set, for the red lantern to be his only light again. He took the original glass negative, the close-up of Elspeth. A negative held more detail, more pure information than any print. He put his loupe to the glass. He focused on the water, on the dark, clinging tendrils. He adjusted the focus, his eye pressed so close he was almost touching the glass. He zoomed in as far as he could, and the terror, which he thought had peaked, found a new, bottomless depth. The tendrils. They weren't smooth. They were textured. He looked closer, his hand shaking, making the image swim. He held his breath, steadied his grip. The texture was script. Tiny, writhing, microscopic characters like some ancient, unreadable language etched into the very substance of the clinging shadows. No, not script. He looked again, his eye watering from the strain. Not script. Faces. The tendrils were composed of millions of infinitesimal, screaming faces, their mouths stretched in a uniform, silent agony. The water of the serpent's coil was a living, breathing composite entity of pure torment, and it was claiming the congregation, one by one. Elias Thorne did not sleep. He sat on the floor of his dark room, the red light casting demonic shadows on the walls, staring at the glass plate in his hands. The air in the room was suffocating, thick with the smell of acetic acid and his own cold sweat. His mind, a place that had always been orderly, a fortress of logic and process, was crumbling. He had seen the impossible. The camera, his instrument of truth, had revealed a horror that his eyes were never meant to see. The world he understood, a world of physics and light, had been peeled back to show a writhing, malevolent unreality beneath. Those faces, the microscopic, agonizing faces that formed the living water. He could not unsee them. They were burned into his memory, more vivid than the print itself. He was a man holding a bomb. No, worse. He was a man who had looked into the abyss, and the abyss had been captured on silver gelatin. His first instinct was to destroy it, to smash the glass negative against the wall, to burn the prints until they were nothing but gray ash. He could flee. He could take his horse and buggy and ride out of Providence Creek and never look back. He could tell Blackwood the plates were faulty, that the fog had ruined them. But a cold professional pride warred with his terror. This was his work. It was, perhaps, the most important photograph ever taken. It was proof. Proof of what? That hell was real and it was a river in Maine. And then, another, colder thought. What if Blackwood knew? What if the Reverend had commissioned him specifically for this? "I want the blessing made manifest," he had said. "I want a record. Proof." Elias realized with a jolt of icy fear, Blackwood didn't see a curse. He saw a miracle. He wanted this photograph as a sacred text, a testament to his true word. And the group portrait, the blurred, eroded faces of the congregation. It was as if their very identities were being washed away, smoothed over, like pebbles in a tumbler, all except the newly baptized who were blank slates, and Blackwood, who was the shepherd of this damnation. He had to know more. He had to understand what these people were. He carefully packed the negatives. He hid the most damning ones, the close-up of Elspeth and the main group portrait, at the very bottom of his chemical case, beneath a false bottom he'd built to smuggle plates across borders. The other, less revealing prints, he placed in a portfolio. He would have to show Blackwood something. He cleaned his room, pouring the chemicals back into their bottles, scrubbing the floor where he'd spilled the fixer. He needed to appear normal. He needed to be the mundane photographer, the city man in over his head perhaps, but not a man who had seen the unseeable. When dawn broke, gray and miserable, he unbarred his door. The boarding house was silent. He walked down the narrow hall to Martha Gideon's kitchen. She was there, kneading dough with a frantic, jerky motion, her back to him. "Mrs. Gideon," he said, his voice sounding hollow to his own ears. She jumped, a small squeak escaping her. "Mr. Thorne, you were working all night. The smells, they came under the door. My apologies. The developing process is pungent," he said, trying for a casual tone. "I've finished the portraits. They are quite striking." He watched her closely. Her hands were caked in flour, but he could see they were trembling. "He will be pleased," she whispered, not looking at him. "The Reverend, he values the record. Mrs. Gideon, Elspeth, the young woman who was first. Is she well?" She seemed unwell after the immersion. Martha Gideon's hands stopped. She went utterly still. For a full 10 seconds she did not move. Then slowly she turned. Her face was a mask of sheer animal terror. Her eyes were wide, and her bottom lip trembled. "You must not," she hissed, her voice a dry rattle. "You must not ask. You are an outsider. You are light. This is a dark place, Mr. Thorne. A wet place." "What is happening in this town?" Elias pressed, taking a step closer. "What is in that river?" "It's the congregation," she whimpered, tears welling in her pale eyes. "It's always been the congregation. Before the town, before the chapel. It calls. The congregation? I thought you were the congregation. We are just the vessels. The choir," she said, her gaze drifting past him toward the window, toward the woods. "The true congregation is in the coil. It found us." "Or we found it. Blackwood's grandfather. He made the covenant. We provide the new voices, and it provides." "Provides what?" Elias demanded. "Life. Sustenance," she said. a strange, faint smile touching her lips. "We do not hunger here. The crops never fail, though the ground is sour. We do not ail. The children are born strong." She looked at her own flour-caked hands. "But there is a cost. It takes the sharp edges. It makes us one. It washes away the self." This was the erosion he'd seen in the photograph. The smudged, blurred faces. They were being literally dissolved into a collective. "And the baptized?" he asked, his voice low. "They are the new ones. They are closest to it, full of its word," she whispered. She looked back at him, her eyes suddenly sharp with fear. "He will know you are asking. The Reverend. He hears. The water. It's in the pipes. It's in the well. It's in us. It listens." She pointed a trembling, floury finger at the pitcher of water on his breakfast tray. "Don't. Drink." "The water," she mouthed, without making a sound. A cold dread, heavier than any he had ever known, settled over him. He had been washing his plates in it. He had been washing his face in it. He backed out of the kitchen, nodding. "Thank you for the breakfast, Mrs. Gideon." He returned to his room and, with a shudder of repulsion, poured the pitcher of water out the window. He watched it hit the muddy ground below. It looked thick, oily. He had to get out. But he couldn't, not until he delivered the photos to Blackwood. And he knew, with a terrible certainty, that Blackwood would never let him leave with the truth. The Reverend wanted a sacred relic, but Elias had created a piece of evidence. The camera hadn't just captured a miracle. It had captured a crime. A soul-devouring, monstrous crime. And he, Elias Thorne, was now a witness. Elias knew he couldn't confront Blackwood directly. Not yet. He needed an ally, or at least a second opinion from someone who wasn't under the Reverend's spiritual thrall. His commission letter had mentioned a town doctor, a man named Arbuthnot, who countersigned the bank draft. A doctor, Elias reasoned, must be a man of science. He would be the only other person in this forsaken town who might understand, or at least believe, the empirical evidence of a photograph. He found Dr. Arbuthnot's practice in a small clapboard house identical to the others, distinguished only by a small, weathered brass plaque. He knocked, and the door was opened by the man himself. Dr. Arbuthnot was the antithesis of Blackwood. He was short, portly, and balding, with a tweed suit that was rumpled and stained with what Elias hoped was iodine. His eyes, behind thick spectacles, were watery and nervous. "Mr. Thorne, the photographer." Yes, come in, Arbuthnot bustled, wringing his hands. "A frightful morning. The fog, you know, plays havoc with the humors, makes the arthritis flare up." The surgery was cluttered but clean, smelling of carbolic acid and old paper. It was a beacon of rationality in the sea of dread. "Doctor, I've come to you in a professional capacity, though not as a patient," Elias began, choosing his words with care. "I've seen things in my photographs, things that concern me. As a man of science, I thought you might—" Arbuthnot's nervous smile faltered. He stopped bustling and his gaze sharpened. "Photographs? You mean the baptism? Yes, a powerful day. A powerful tradition." "It's more than tradition, Doctor," Elias said. He opened his portfolio and took out one of the prints. Not the worst one, but one showing the second baptism, a young boy. He laid it on the desk. "Look closely. I am a master of my craft. This is not a blur. This is not a smudge." The doctor squinted at the print. He picked it up, his hand shaking slightly. My, the clarity. It's remarkable. You've captured the fervor of the moment. Look at the water, Doctor," Elias pressed. "Use your magnifying glass. Look at the water on his skin." Arbuthnot sighed, but he retrieved a loupe from his desk, identical to Elias's. He bent over the photograph. He was silent for a long time, his breathing becoming shallow. Elias watched him zoom in. He saw the doctor's knuckles turn white as he gripped the desk. He saw a bead of sweat roll down his temple. "Doctor?" Arbuthnot suddenly threw the photograph down on the desk, pushing it away from him. He stood up, knocking his chair over. "Humbug! Folderol!" he shouted, his voice high and reedy. "It's an artifact, a chemical stain. You city men come here with your contraptions, your flash powders and your silver nitrates. You don't understand our ways. You cast your false lightning and you capture shadows, tricks." "That is not a trick, Doctor," Elias said calmly, though his heart was sinking. "That is what the lens saw. That water it's formed." "It's nothing!" Arbuthnot shrieked, backing away from the desk. "It is nothing! You will not speak of this. Do you hear me? You will not show this libel to anyone." "I'm concerned for the baptized, Doctor. Elspeth, the others. They seemed catatonic. They are at peace," Arbuthnot said, his face pale and slick with sweat. He was trying to straighten his tie, but his hands were trembling too much. "The Lord's work is tiring. They are in communion, resting. They are fine." "You're his man, aren't you?" Elias said, the realization dawning. "You're part of it, this covenant." Arbuthnot's face crumpled. The bluster vanished, replaced by the same naked terror Elias had seen in Martha Gideon. He saved us," the doctor whimpered, collapsing back into his righted chair. "Years ago. My wife, my Mary, she had the consumption, wasting away. The doctors in Portland gave her weeks. We came here as a last resort. Blackwood, he took her to the river. He prayed. He immersed her. And?" Elias asked, dreading the answer. "And she was cured," Arbuthnot whispered. "The consumption, it vanished. She was strong again, healthy, rosy." He paused, his eyes unfocused, lost in a memory. "But she wasn't Mary, not anymore. Her sharp edges, as you say, her laugh, the way she'd hum when she was baking, it was all gone, smoothed over. She was quiet, obedient, her eyes just like theirs." He gestured vaguely toward the window, at the town. "She's one of the blurred faces," Elias realized. "She died 10 years ago," Arbuthnot said, his voice flat. "But she didn't stop. I buried her, and 2 days later, she was sitting at the kitchen table, waiting for me." He was sobbing now, quiet, gasping sobs. She still is. She doesn't speak. She just sits and watches. The water, it provides, it sustains. It doesn't let go." "My God," Elias breathed. "So you see, Mr. Thorne," Arbuthnot said, wiping his face, his composure returning, but as a rigid, brittle thing. "You will take your money. You will give the Reverend the photographs he desires, the nice ones, of the congregation, not these blasphemies, and you will leave. You will say the fog spoiled your more artistic attempts, or you will not leave at all. The serpent's coil is deep, Mr. Thorne, and it is always, always hungry." The doctor, a man of science, had just confessed to living with a reanimated corpse and then threatened his life. Elias Thorne was truly alone. He gathered his print, his portfolio, and walked out of the surgery into the gray, watching silence of Providence Creek. Elias walked through the muddy street, his portfolio heavy under his arm. Every shadow seemed to pulse. Every curtained window felt like a pair of watching, milky eyes. He knew what he had to do. He couldn't run, not yet. He had to face Blackwood. He had to perform the role of the simple photographer, deliver a product, and get his leave to depart. He knocked on the heavy oak door of the parsonage. It was opened instantly, as if the Reverend had been standing just behind it, waiting. "Mr. Thorne, you have the fruits of your labor, I trust." "I do, Reverend," Elias said, forcing his voice to remain steady. "I have the group portraits. The fog. It made the action shots very difficult, as I warned. Many are indistinct. But the portraits of the congregation are quite clear." He was ushered back into the same dark parlor. This time, Blackwood lit 2 more lamps, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. "Show me," he commanded. Elias laid out the prints on the heavy mahogany table. He had chosen his offerings carefully. He presented the 2 group portraits. The ones where, from a distance, the eroded faces were not immediately apparent. They just looked like a large, somber group of people. He also included a few of the landscape shots he'd taken, of the river and the trees. He held back the baptism shots. Blackwood leaned over the table, his gaunt frame casting a long shadow. He studied the group portraits. He did not use a magnifying glass. He simply stared. "Yes," he breathed. "Yes, it is captured. The unity, the strength." Elias watched him, baffled. Did the man not see the blurring, the strange, eroded features? Or was that what he wanted to see? Was this unity the very dissolution of self that Martha and Arbuthnot feared? "The newly baptized," Elias ventured, pointing to the blank-eyed figures in the front row. "They seem at peace." "They are," Blackwood said, a rare, thin smile gracing his lips. "They are quiet. They are listening to the true word. They have been emptied of the self and filled with a greater purpose. They are one with the congregation." "And the others?" Elias pushed, gesturing to the blurred faces in the back. "The fog, it seems." "The fog?" Blackwood looked up, his dark eyes locking onto Elias. "No, Mr. Thorne, that is not fog. That is faith. That is the old self, melting away, becoming part of the whole. It is beautiful, is it not? You have captured the very essence of our covenant." Blackwood was enraptured. He was looking at a monstrous, supernatural photograph and seeing divine proof. The man was utterly, terrifyingly insane. "But where are the others?" Blackwood's tone sharpened. "Where are the immersions? Where is the moment of union? You used your false lightning. You promised me clarity." The trap was sprung. Elias had no choice. "As I said, Reverend, the motion, the water, it created artifacts," Elias stammered. "They are compromised. Show me." It was not a request. With a trembling hand, Elias retrieved the print of Elspeth, the one where the tendrils were visible, but not the microscopic faces. He laid it on the table. Blackwood's eyes widened. He sucked in a sharp breath. He did not look horrified. He looked ecstatic. "Manifest," he whispered. "It is manifest. The arm of the divine, the word itself, reaching out to claim its own. It shows." He traced the outline of the black tendril that was entering Elspeth's mouth with a long, pale finger. "Incredible. Your machine. It can see the spirit. It can see the substance of the blessing." He looked up at Elias, and his smile was no longer thin. It was wide, triumphant, and utterly devoid of humanity. "You have done a great service, Mr. Thorne, a holy service. You have given us our sacred text." "Then our business is concluded," Elias said, already moving to pack his portfolio. "If you'll settle the remainder of my fee, I will be on my way. I have another commission in Boston." Blackwood's smile vanished. "Leave?" "No, Mr. Thorne, I don't think so." What do you mean?" "Our contract is fulfilled." "Our contract has just begun," Blackwood said, his voice dropping to that rumbling growl. "You have a gift, your machine. It sees the truth. I have other work for you." I cannot," Elias said, his blood running cold. "You do not understand," Blackwood said, stepping between Elias and the door. This is a revelation. We must document all of it, the next 7 years. We must see how the blessing changes them. We must see deeper." He wanted more photos. He wanted a catalog of the damnation. "Reverend, I must decline," Elias said, his voice shaking. "Mr. Thorne, you are an outsider, a man of light and air. You have seen our inner workings. Do you think we can let you leave with this knowledge, with this proof?" Blackwood gestured to the photo. "The outside world, they would not understand. They would call it humbug, as our good doctor would say. They would interfere." "I will say nothing," Elias promised, his hand gripping the heavy tripod he still carried. "I swear it." "Of course you won't," Blackwood said, his voice soft. "You have two choices. You can stay, Mr. Thorne. You can become our chronicler. We will give you a house. You will be sustained. You will never grow old. You will never hunger. You will join the choir. And the second choice? Elias whispered. Blackwood's eyes flicked toward the window, toward the river. The second choice is to join the congregation, more directly. The serpent's coil is deep, and it is always hungry. It was the exact same thing Arbuthnot had said. It was a rehearsed line, a death sentence. I need to retrieve the rest of the plates, Elias lied, his mind racing. From my room. The main negatives. They are for you, of course, for your record. Blackwood studied him, his gaze piercing. Of course, go, retrieve them. Bring them all to me. And Mr. Thorne? Yes? Do not disappoint me. The town is watching. Elias bolted from the parsonage. He didn't walk, he ran. The muddy street was empty, but he felt them. Hundreds of eyes, in the windows, in the alleys, in the shadows of the pines. The entire town was a living, breathing trap, and he was the only one who could see the teeth. Elias burst into his room at the boarding house, slamming the door and ramming the flimsy chair under the knob. It wouldn't hold them, not for long, but he needed seconds. His hands were frantic. He was drenched in a cold sweat that had nothing to do with the physical exertion. He could hear Blackwood's voice. The town is watching. He went to the window and peered through the grime. The street, which had been empty, was no longer. They were emerging. From the general store, from the smithy, from their identical clapboard houses, the townspeople. They were filing into the street, one by one. The men with the pale, eroded faces, the women with the dead, watchful eyes. They weren't running, they were simply gathering, forming a silent, pale perimeter around the boarding house. They stood in the mud, motionless, all of them facing his window. He had minutes, maybe less. He tore open his large chemical case. He ripped out the false bottom. There they were, the two glass plates, the group portrait, and the close-up of Elspeth, the sacred text and its damning appendix. He looked at them, the slabs of glass that held an impossible truth. He couldn't leave them. If Blackwood got his hands on them, he would have his holy scripture. He would be emboldened. The covenant would be cemented in silver nitrate, and he couldn't take them. He couldn't run through the woods carrying heavy, fragile glass plates while being hunted. Destroy them. He grabbed his tripod, holding it like a club, ready to smash them to dust. But he stopped. His hands, even in their terror, refused the command. He was a photographer. This was his work. This was the truth. To destroy it felt like a greater sacrilege than anything the Reverend had committed. It was letting the lie win. You have to leave them, but you can't let him have them. He looked around the room, his eyes darting. The rickety wardrobe. The loose floorboard he'd noticed under the bed. The empty fireplace, choked with old soot. The fireplace. He took the two plates. He wrapped them in his oilcloth, the one he used to protect his camera from the rain. He shoved the package deep up the chimney flue, ramming it past the damper, up into the cold, dark, soot-filled void. It was a miserable hiding place. It was the only one he had. Now, his equipment, his camera, his precious Graflex. It was too heavy, too bulky. He couldn't run with it. It felt like abandoning a child. He took only his satchel, stuffing it with his remaining magnesium powder, his loop, and, on a desperate impulse, the few remaining blank glass plates from his box. He didn't know why. He heard a sound, a heavy, rhythmic thud from the street. He looked out the window again. The crowd was still there, but now Dr. Arbuthnot had joined them, and he was holding a large, rusted drum. With him were the two grim, bearded men who had been Blackwood sentinels at the river. They too had drums. Thud, thud, thud. They began to beat them, a slow, methodical, primal rhythm. It was a heartbeat, the heartbeat of the town. And with the beat, the crowd began to move. Not toward the door, but away. They were heading for the woods. They were heading for the river. A new, more terrible understanding dawned on Elias. They weren't coming to get him. They weren't going to break down the door. They were calling him. They were going to the riverbank to summon their congregation. They were going to let the river take him. He heard a different sound, this one from inside the house. A soft, wet slurping. He spun from the window. The door was still barred. The sound was coming from the water pitcher, the one he had emptied out the window. He watched, frozen in horror, as the pitcher, which sat on his breakfast tray, began to fill. From the bottom up, a dark, oily liquid was seeping up from the ceramic pores, coalescing into a black, churning pool inside the pitcher. The water that Martha had warned him about. The water that listens. The water level rose and then it sloshed over the rim, spilling onto the tray and dripping onto the floor. But it didn't just pool. The droplets formed tendrils. They began to crawl like black, oily spiders across the floor. They were coming for him. He had no choice. He couldn't go out the front. He couldn't stay in the room. He grabbed the heavy wooden chair, ignoring the wet, slithering sounds approaching his feet. He hurled it at the window. The glass shattered, exploding outward. The drumming stopped. A single, unified sound rose from the crowd in the street. A long, sibilant hiss, like 1,000 snakes. Elias Thorne threw his satchel over his shoulder, clambered through the broken window frame, and dropped 2 stories into the muddy alley below. He landed hard, pain shooting up his leg, but he didn't care. He scrambled to his feet and ran. He did not run for the road. He ran for the only cover he had. He plunged into the dense, dark, watching woods of Providence Creek. The forest was a different entity at night. In the day, it had been oppressive and silent. Now it was alive. It was alive with the sounds of his own crashing panic, his ragged breaths tearing at his lungs, the snap of every twig under his boots sounding like a gunshot. And it was alive with the sounds of the hunt. He could hear them. They weren't far behind. They weren't running, not like he was. They were moving with a steady, relentless pace. They knew these woods. He was just a rat in their maze. Thud, thud, thud. The drumming had resumed, but it was moving, keeping pace with him. They were flanking him, he realized. They were hurting him. He tried to change direction to cut west, away from the river. But the drumming shifted, anticipating him. He pushed through branches that tore at his face and clothes. The air was cold, but he was burning. He stumbled over a root, falling hard, his satchel flying from his grip. The blank glass plates. He heard one of them crack inside the bag. He scrambled for it, his fingers digging into the leaf litter. He grabbed the strap and hauled himself up. He leaned against a massive pine, his chest heaving. He had to think. He couldn't just run. He was a man of science, a man of process. He listened. The drumming was to his left and his right. They were wide, but they were behind him. They were pushing him north. He was running toward the serpent's coil. No, he whispered, a sob catching in his throat. They weren't just hunting him. They were making an offering. He was the sacrifice. He had to do something they wouldn't expect. He opened his satchel. His hands were shaking, but he forced them to be still. He pulled out his tin of magnesium powder and his ignition switch. He still had the T-bar flash holder hooked to his belt. He climbed the tree he was leaning against. He was not a natural climber, and the thick, rough bark tore at his hands. He climbed until he was 20 feet up, hidden in the dense, dark boughs. He wedged himself against the trunk, breathing as silently as he could. He waited. The drumming grew closer. Thud, thud, thud. He heard their footsteps now, rustling through the leaves. They were passing directly beneath him. He peered down, his heart hammering so hard he was sure they could hear it. He saw them, 3 of them. The 2 bearded sentinels and Dr. Arbuthnot, still grimly beating his drum. They were moving with an unnatural gliding gait. "He is near," Arbuthnot panted, his voice strange and flat. "The water. It feels him. He's warm. He will come to the bank." One of the men growled. "They all come to the bank." They passed beneath him. Elias let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. He had a moment. He could go back, circle around them. But then he saw the others. They were not the townspeople. They were moving in the deep shadows just beyond the path. They were in the trees. At first he thought they were the trees. Tall, impossibly tall and thin, their limbs like skeletal branches. They didn't walk. They seemed to drift between the trunks. Their forms were indistinct, like columns of shadow and moonlight. But he could see the shape of them, and he could see their faces, or rather the lack of them. They were smooth, ovoid shapes, like worn river stones with no features, just a blank, terrifying smoothness. This was the unseen congregation, the ones from the woods, the ones he'd faintly glimpsed in the background of his photograph. They weren't just shadows, they were entities. One of them stopped. It was standing just a few yards from the base of his tree. It tilted its blank head, as if listening. It was looking up. Not at him, but near him. It raised a long, thin arm. It was pointing, not at him, but at a spot just to his left. The drumming stopped. There, Arbuthnot's voice, now directly below. Elias knew he'd been sensed. The thing in the tree hadn't seen him, but it had felt him. Now or never, Elias whispered. He poured a heavy, desperate amount of magnesium powder into the flash trough. He held the T-bar out, aimed it down at the group, and clicked the igniter. Whoosh! A sun exploded in the forest. The blinding white light illuminated everything. Arbuthnot and the two men, their faces contorted in shock and rage, their eyes squeezed shut, and it illuminated the others. In that millisecond of pure white light, the shadow things were given substance. They were not made of shadow. They were made of bark and mud and thick, tangled river weed. They were creatures of the forest floor, animated, and in the center of their blank faces, a single weeping, black-filled hole opened up, like a mouth, in a silent, agonizing scream against the light. The men on the ground roared in pain, blinded. Elias didn't wait. He launched himself from the tree, dropping the 15 feet into a thicket of ferns, rolling as he hit the ground. He was up and running again, sprinting in the opposite direction, back toward the town, while the world behind him was still reeling in the after-images of his false sun. He could hear them shouting, confused, firing their rifles blindly into the trees. But he was already gone, lost in the blackness they could no longer navigate. Elias ran until his lungs were fire and his legs were jelly. He didn't dare stop until he had burst through the tree line and stumbled back into the muddy main street of Providence Creek. The village was utterly dark, silent, abandoned. The entire population was in the woods, hunting him, but he was not safe. He knew, instinctively, that the houses were not empty. The sustained ones, the ones like Dr. Arbuthnot's Mary. He had to get his horse, his buggy. It was his only way out. He had left it at the town's single livery stable, at the far end of the street, near the road that led out. He moved in the shadows, flitting from the smithy to the general store. The silence was, in its own way, as terrifying as the drums. He could feel the listening water. He could feel the village itself, a dormant creature, aware of his presence. He reached the general store and ducked into the deep shadow of its porch. He needed to catch his breath. He leaned against the wall, next to a stack of barrels. A sharp, acrid smell hit his nose. Lye. They were barrels of lye, for soap making. And he heard a sound. From inside the store, a soft, wet whisper. It was not one voice. It was many. A chorus of wet, sibilant whispers. Saw the light. The false light. It burns. It burns the word. The warm one. He hides in the dark. He must come to the water. He must be washed. Elias clamped his hand over his mouth to stifle his cry. The sound was coming from a metal pipe that ran down the side of the building, a drain pipe. The voices were in the pipes. The water wasn't just in the well. It was a network, a consciousness. The entire town was wired with this liquid entity. It was speaking to itself. He goes to the stable. A new whisper bubbled up, seeming to come from the ground itself, from the wet mud at his feet. He seeks the beast, the outside. Stop him. They knew. The water itself was a spy. He heard a new sound, a scraping, from the livery stable. They were already there. He was cut off. He couldn't go for his horse. He looked at the barrels of lye. An idea sparked, a desperate chemical gamble. Lye. Caustic soda. It was a powerful, violent alkali. What would it do to a creature, to a substance that was water-based? He didn't have time to test it. He had to go back to the one place they wouldn't expect. He grabbed a small, discarded sack from the porch. He ripped the top off one of the barrels. The powder inside was white and unassuming. He scooped as much as he could into the sack, handful after handful, until it was heavy. He ran, crouching low, back the way he came, back toward the center of town, back toward the parsonage and the chapel. If the water was its consciousness, he had to get to the heart of it. He had to find the source. And he had a terrible suspicion he knew where it was. The chapel of the True Word stood dark, its steeple a black spear against the stars. The door was unlocked. Elias pushed it open, his sack of lye held tight. The inside was cavernous, smelling of river mud, decay, and something else. Something metallic and sharp, like old blood. The pews were slick with a thin, oily film. The air was cold, damp. At the front of the chapel, where an altar should have been, there was only a wide, circular opening in the floor. A hole, a well. Elias approached it, his boots echoing in the emptiness. The whispers were louder here. They were rising from the hole, a chorus of sibilant, overlapping voices. So warm, so full of self. He must be emptied. Bring him to the font. The font was not the river. It was this. This was the heart. This was the main artery. A direct shaft into the earth, connecting, no doubt, to the serpent's coil. This was where the congregation lived, protected from the sun, connected to every pipe and well in the village. He looked down. He couldn't see the bottom. Only a dark, circular void from which the whispers and the stench emanated. A clever rat, returning to the trap. Elias spun. Reverend Blackwood was standing in the doorway, blocking the only exit. He was not alone. The two bearded sentinels were with him, and this time they were holding not drums, but heavy, rusted whaling harpoons. The hunt was invigorating, Mr. Thorne, Blackwood said, walking slowly down the aisle. But unnecessary. All things in Providence Creek eventually come to the chapel. All water flows downhill. You monster, Elias panted, backing away until his heels hit the stone rim of the well. You're feeding them. You're sacrificing your own people. Sacrifice? Blackwood laughed, a dry, cold sound. No, Mr. Thorne, it is communion. We are becoming part of something eternal, something so much greater than our small, fleeting, painful lives. The self is a disease, Mr. Thorne. It is the source of all sin, all fear, all pain. The congregation, it cures us of it. It dissolves you, Elias spat. It turns you into those screaming faces. Blackwood's smile faltered. He stopped. What? What did you say? I saw them, Elias shouted, his voice cracking with hysteria and rage. In the water, in the close-up. I zoomed in, Reverend. Your true word is a prison. It's made of the souls you've fed it. It's a living hell. For the first time, Blackwood looked surprised. Then, his face darkened with a terrible, possessive fury. The negative, he hissed. You saw that, on the negative. Yes, and I hid it. I hid it where you will never find it, you brimstone-peddling ghoul. You fool! Blackwood roared. He was no longer the calm, cold zealot. He was a collector whose prize had been defiled. That was not for your eyes. That was our most holy text. You insect, you have stained it with your seeing. He lunged, but his men were faster. The two sentinels raised their harpoons, ready to pin Elias and throw him into the well. Now! Elias screamed. He ripped open the sack of lye and dumped the entire contents down the black hole. The reaction was instantaneous. It was not a sound. It was a pressure, a deep, subterranean shriek that Elias felt in his bones, not his ears. The whispers, the sibilant chorus, rose into a single, deafening, agonizing roar. A geyser of black, foaming sludge erupted from the font. It was not water. It was a thick, bubbling, chemical nightmare. The lye was reacting violently with the substance. The smell of ammonia and burning hair filled the chapel. The black substance splashed onto the pews, and the wood sizzled, smoking and dissolving. Blackwood and his men screamed, clutching their heads as the psychic shriek tore through them. The water in their own bodies, the covenant that sustained them, was burning. "It burns!" one of the sentinels roared, dropping his harpoon and scratching at his own face, his fingernails leaving deep furrows. Blackwood was on his knees, his hands pressed to his temples. The word. The pain. No. The black sludge was pouring from the well now, a living tide of burning agony. It was flowing across the floor, and it was crawling. The tendrils were forming, but they were dying. They were writhing and then turning brittle, crumbling into a foul-smelling black ash. Elias didn't wait. He leaped over the writhing reverend, grabbed a lit oil lamp from the wall, and hurled it back into the frothing, lye-filled well. The lamp struck the bubbling sludge, and the oil ignited. The entire well, the entire shaft, went up in a whoomph of orange flame. The burning, chemical-laced substance painted the chapel in a hellish, dancing light. Elias ran. He ran out of the chapel, leaving Blackwood and his men screaming in the fire, their own bodies beginning to smoke as the water inside them boiled. The town was in chaos. As Elias sprinted down the main street, he saw them, the sustained ones, the blurred faces. They were stumbling out of their houses, their bodies jerking in violent, unnatural seizures. They were clutching their throats, their stomachs. Black, oily smoke was seeping from their pores, from their eyes, their mouths. The water inside them, their unholy life force, was being cleansed by the lie. It was burning them from the inside out. He saw Dr. Arbuthnot's Mary on her porch, a static seated figure, now fully wreathed in a foul black steam, her dress smoldering. The town was dying. The network had been poisoned. He reached the livery stable. The men who had been waiting for him were gone, fled back toward the chapel at the sound of the explosion. His horse was there, stamping nervously in its stall, terrified by the sounds and the smell. "It's all right, boy," Elias soothed, his hands shaking as he fumbled with the harness. He didn't have time for the buggy. He would ride bareback. He led the horse out. The sky to the north, over the woods, was glowing. The fire from the chapel well must have been spreading, igniting the methane in the bogs, or the river itself. He swung himself onto the horse's back. He kicked its flanks, and the terrified animal leaped forward, galloping down the muddy track, away from the burning, screaming village. He did not look back. He rode for hours, pushing the horse, pushing himself, until the sun began to rise. He rode until the smell of pine and burning mud was replaced by the clean salt spray of the coast. He reached Portland by evening, a mud-caked, smoke-stained specter, riding a horse half dead from exhaustion. He sold the horse and the harness for pennies, just enough to buy a train ticket. He got on the southbound train and collapsed into a velvet-upholstered seat. He was surrounded by men in crisp suits reading newspapers and women in fashionable hats discussing the weather. It was 1908. It was the modern world. It was clean and bright and sane. Elias Thorne sat there, his hands raw and bleeding, his clothes stiff with mud and soot, and he began to weep. He wept for his camera, for his craft, but most of all, he wept because he knew, with a chilling certainty, that the world these people lived in was a fragile, paper-thin illusion, and he had seen the truth that slithered just beneath it. 2 years passed. The year was 1910. Elias Thorne never returned to Providence Creek. He told no one what happened. Who would believe him? He reported that his equipment had been lost in a bog fire while on commission. The bank draft had already cleared. He used the money to open a small, respectable portrait studio in Boston. He had a new camera, a new tripod, new lenses. He took portraits of wealthy matrons, of bright-eyed children, of stern-faced politicians. His work was competent, but the spark was gone. He never again pursued the truth of the lens. He sought only the pleasant, polished surface. He never spoke of the serpent's coil, of Reverend Blackwood, or of the congregation. The town of Providence Creek, Maine, was officially listed as defunct in the state registry of 1909, its population having disappeared after a series of unexplained swamp fires. Elias had almost convinced himself it was a nightmare, a fever dream, brought on by the fog and the isolation and the strange insular townsfolk. Almost. But he had lied. He had kept something. He hadn't taken just blank plates in his satchel that night. In his panic, he had grabbed the wrong box. He had, entirely by accident, saved one of the developed negatives. He had not looked at it in 2 years. It sat in a locked wooden box at the bottom of his wardrobe, wrapped in black velvet. On the second anniversary of that night, he found himself, after a long day of tedious portraits, drawn to the box. He took it out. His hands, he noted with detachment, were trembling. He told himself he was a man of science. He needed to know. Was his memory true? He went into his state-of-the-art darkroom. He turned on the red safety lamp. He unwrapped the velvet. It was the group portrait, the one of the entire congregation. He held it up to the dim red light. It was all there. The blurred, eroded faces, the blank-eyed newly baptized, and Reverend Blackwood in perfect, crisp focus, staring with that look of grim satisfaction. His heart began to pound. The smell of the chemicals in his darkroom suddenly mingled with the phantom stench of river mud. He took his new, high-powered German loop. "Just a look," he whispered to the empty room. "Just to confirm." He placed the glass plate on his light table. He pressed the loop to the glass. He zoomed in. He focused first on Blackwood's face. So clear, so evil. He moved the loop to the blurred faces in the back row. Yes, just as he remembered. Their features were melting. He moved the loop again, this time to the front row, to the face of Elspeth, sitting vacant-eyed at the Reverend's feet. He zoomed in on her eye. It was milky, blank. He adjusted the focus. No, it wasn't blank. He just hadn't looked closely enough. Inside the milky white orb of her eye, captured with perfect scientific precision by his old lens, was a face. A tiny, screaming face, its mouth stretched in a silent, agonizing wail. The same faces he had seen in the water. He gasped, pulling back. But he was drawn back. He looked at the next baptized youth. He zoomed in on his eye. Another face, and another, and another. They weren't just washed. They weren't just emptied. They were containers. The true word wasn't just the water. It was the souls it had collected, and the newly baptized. They were the new cages. He was staring, his breath held, his eye pressed to the loop, when he saw it. In the dark, reflective glass of the negative, just outside the circle of his loop, he saw a reflection. It was his own eye, staring back at him, and it was milky white. He dropped the loop. He scrambled back, knocking over a tray of developer. He ran to the small mirror he kept on the wall. He stared at his reflection in the dim red light. His eyes, dark, brown, terrified. He let out a shaky laugh. A trick of the light, the reflection, the red lamp. But as he stared, he couldn't be sure. Had his left eye twitched? He leaned closer until his breath fogged the glass. He stared into his own reflection, into his own pupils, and deep, deep, deep inside, he thought he saw something swimming. He never entered his dark room again.